The ghost pepper wings sat innocently on the plate as Sheriff Corinne reached for her third piece. Her face was already flushed red, sweat beading on her forehead, but her pride would not let her admit defeat. She took another massive bite, and I watched from behind the counter as her eyes began to water uncontrollably. The entire restaurant had gone silent, watching our town's most feared authority figure reduced to gasping and clawing at her throat. That was the moment I realized my plan had worked perfectly. My name is Sarah, and for 15 years I ran the best little restaurant in Millbrook County. The Morning Glory Diner was not much to look at from the outside, just a converted farmhouse with checkered curtains and a hand-painted sign that my late husband made before he passed. But inside, it was magic. The smell of fresh biscuits and bacon filled the air every morning at 5:30 sharp. Regular customers knew their coffee would be hot, their eggs cooked just right, and their troubles listened to with genuine care. I took pride in knowing every customer by name. There was old Pete who came in for black coffee and wheat toast every Tuesday. Miss Helen always ordered the same chicken salad sandwich after church on Sundays. The high school kids would crowd into the corner booth after football games, laughing and making memories over milkshakes and pie. This was my world, simple and honest, built on hard work and treating people right. Then Sheriff Corinne started coming around. At first, I was honored to serve our local law enforcement. Corinne wore her uniform like armor, pressed and perfect, her badge gleaming under the diner lights. She was a large woman with cold blue eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. When she walked in, conversations got quieter. People looked down at their plates. Even my cheerful regulars seemed to shrink a little when she was around. I tried my best to make her feel welcome. I would greet her with the same warm smile I gave everyone else. "Good morning, Sheriff. What can I get started for you today?" She would settle into the corner booth, the one that gave her a clear view of the entire restaurant, and order her usual. Black coffee, extra hot, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, no butter, and she expected it fast. But Corinne was different from my other customers. She never said thank you. She never left a tip. She would sit there for hours sometimes, making phone calls and staring at people until they got uncomfortable and left. When other officers came in with her, they seemed nervous around her too. They would laugh too loud at her jokes and agree with everything she said, even when it made no sense. I started noticing small things that bothered me. Corinne would make comments about my customers when they left. She would say things like, "That Johnson boy is trouble," or "Someone should keep an eye on the Martinez family." It felt wrong, but I told myself she was just doing her job. I was raised to respect authority, especially law enforcement. My father always said you treat police officers with extra kindness because they risk their lives to keep us safe. So I kept serving Corinne with a smile, even when her demands became more unreasonable. She wanted her coffee refilled before it was half empty. She expected her food faster than was physically possible to cook. She would snap her fingers at me like I was her personal servant instead of a business owner. The other customers started to notice, and I could see the pity in their eyes when they watched me scramble to keep Corinne happy. Looking back now, I realized that was when everything started to change. Corinne was testing me, seeing how far she could push before I pushed back. She was like a predator studying her prey, learning my weaknesses and figuring out exactly how to destroy everything I had worked so hard to build. But at the time, I was just a small business owner trying to do right by everyone who walked through my door, including someone who definitely did not deserve it. The first attack came disguised as concern. It was a Tuesday morning in March when Corinne walked into my diner with a clipboard and that same cold smile. She was not there for breakfast. She was there for what she called a routine inspection. My stomach dropped because I knew restaurant inspections were handled by the county health department, not the sheriff's office. "Sarah, I have been hearing some complaints about your establishment," she said, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. My regular customers looked up from their coffee cups with worried expressions. Nothing too serious, but I thought I should take a look around myself before it becomes a bigger problem. I felt my face burn with embarrassment, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Of course, Sheriff. What kind of complaints?" She never answered that question directly. Instead, she walked around my spotless kitchen making notes on her clipboard, pointing out imaginary problems that did not exist. She claimed my refrigerator temperature was off, even though I had just checked it that morning. She said my hand washing station was not properly stocked, despite the fact that soap and paper towels were clearly visible. The worst part was watching my customers' reactions. People who had eaten at my diner for years suddenly looked uncertain. They whispered to each other and glanced nervously at the kitchen. Some finished their meals quickly and left without their usual friendly conversation. I could see doubt creeping into their minds, planted by Karen's public display of authority. That afternoon, I received my first anonymous complaint call to the Real Health Department. The caller claimed they had gotten food poisoning from eating at my restaurant. It was a lie, but I had to endure a real inspection anyway. Thank God my kitchen passed with flying colors, but the damage was already done. Word spreads fast in a small town, and suddenly people were questioning whether the Morning Glory diner was as safe as they thought. The anonymous complaints kept coming. Someone called the fire department claiming my emergency exits were blocked. They were not. Someone reported that I was serving alcohol without a license. I had never served alcohol in my life. Someone even called child services claiming I was allowing minors to work in unsafe conditions. My teenage dishwasher was the grandson of one of my regulars, and he worked part-time after school with all the proper permits. Each false report meant another official visit, another inspection, another public display that made my customers wonder what was wrong with my restaurant. I started to notice patterns in the complaints. They always came right after Karen had been in for one of her increasingly frequent visits. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. One evening, as I was closing up, I overheard Mrs. Patterson talking to her friend outside my window. "I heard there have been a lot of problems at the Morning Glory lately," she said. "Sheriff Karen mentioned something about health code violations when I saw her at the grocery store." My heart sank as I realized Karen was not just filing false reports. She was actively spreading rumors throughout the community. I decided to confront her directly. The next time she came in for her usual breakfast, I asked if we could speak privately. We walked outside behind the diner, and I took a deep breath before speaking. "Sheriff, I know you have been making complaints about my restaurant. I need to know what I have done wrong so I can fix it." Karen looked at me with those cold blue eyes and smiled. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Sarah. I'm just trying to keep this community safe. If people are complaining about your establishment, maybe you should look at your own business practices instead of blaming others." Her voice was sweet as honey, but there was ice underneath. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she wanted me to know that I was powerless to stop her. That night, I sat in my empty restaurant and cried for the first time since my husband died. 15 years of building relationships, creating memories, and serving my community with pride, and it was all being destroyed by one person's lies. But I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. The morning that changed everything started like any other. I opened the diner at 5:30, started the coffee brewing, and began preparing for the breakfast rush. The sun was just coming up over the hills, painting the sky in soft pink and orange. It should have been peaceful, but I had learned to feel anxious every morning, wondering what new attack Karen might launch against my business. By 7 o'clock, I noticed more cars than usual in my parking lot. Then more. By 7:30, there was a line of vehicles stretching down Main Street. People were getting out of their cars and walking toward my diner with expectant looks on their faces. Families with children, teenagers in groups, elderly couples holding hands. I had never seen so many people heading to my restaurant at once. The first family through the door was the Hendersons from across town. "We are here for the free buffet," Mrs. Henderson announced cheerfully. "My sister called and said you were having some kind of community appreciation day with free food for everyone." My blood turned to ice. "I am sorry, what free buffet? I never announced any free buffet." Mr. Henderson pulled out his phone and showed me a Facebook post that had been shared dozens of times. The post claimed that the Morning Glory Diner was offering a free all-you-can-eat buffet to celebrate our 15th anniversary. It thanked the community for their support and invited everyone to come eat for free between 7 and 11 that morning. I had never written that post. I had never planned any free buffet, but more people kept coming through the door and they were all expecting free food. The teenagers were taking pictures for social media. The families were seating themselves at every available table. The elderly couples were asking where the buffet line started. My small staff of 3 looked at me with panic in their eyes. We had enough food prepared for maybe 30 customers, not the 100+ people who were now crowding into my restaurant. Some people were understanding when I explained that there had been a mistake, but others became angry. They had driven from other towns based on what they thought was my official announcement. "This is false advertising," one man shouted. "You cannot promise free food and then back out." Children were crying because their parents had promised them a special breakfast. Elderly people who had made the difficult trip were confused and disappointed. The situation was spiraling out of control, and I had to make a choice. I could turn everyone away and face their anger, or I could honor the false promise and go bankrupt in the process. I chose to feed them. For the next 4 hours, my staff and I worked like we were fighting a war. We cooked every piece of food in the restaurant. We ran to the grocery store twice to buy more ingredients. We called in favors from other local businesses to borrow supplies. I spent nearly $2,000 of my own money trying to feed everyone who had been deceived by the fake announcement. The worst part was seeing Corinne across the street during the chaos. She was parked in front of the hardware store, sitting in her patrol car with the windows down, watching my restaurant like it was her personal entertainment. She was not trying to help with crowd control. She was not investigating who had made the false social media post. She was just watching me suffer with what looked like genuine pleasure on her face. People were taking pictures and videos of the chaos. Someone live-streamed the whole thing on Facebook, making jokes about the disaster at the Morning Glory Diner. The comments were brutal. People called me unprofessional, disorganized, and accused me of pulling a publicity stunt gone wrong. The story spread beyond our small town, and I became a viral example of a business owner who had promised more than she could deliver. By noon, when the last customer finally left, my restaurant looked like a hurricane had hit it. Tables were overturned. The kitchen was destroyed. My staff was exhausted and traumatized, and I was facing financial ruin. The false promise had cost me thousands of dollars, damaged my reputation beyond repair, and turned me into a laughingstock throughout the county. That evening, as I sat among the wreckage of my restaurant, I finally understood what Corinne had been building toward. This was not random harassment. This was a calculated destruction designed to drive me out of business permanently. She had won, and she wanted me to know it. The weeks following the fake buffet disaster were the darkest of my life. Customers stopped coming to the Morning Glory Diner. The few who did show up would make jokes about free food or ask suspicious questions about my business practices. My revenue dropped by 80% almost overnight. I had to let 2 of my 3 employees go, keeping only Jenny, my longtime waitress who had become like a daughter to me. The bills kept coming, but the money did not. I spent my savings trying to keep the restaurant afloat, but it was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. The suppliers wanted payment up front. The landlord started asking pointed questions about next month's rent. My insurance company received another anonymous complaint claiming I had served spoiled food, which triggered another investigation and higher premiums. I sat in my empty restaurant one Tuesday evening, staring at bankruptcy papers that my lawyer had prepared. 15 years of dreams were reduced to legal documents and debt calculations. I had built something beautiful, something that brought joy to people's lives, and now it was dying because of one person's cruelty. The worst part was feeling so powerless. Karen had used her badge and authority to destroy me, and there seemed to be nothing I could do to fight back. That was when Jenny brought me the lifeline I desperately needed. She had been cleaning tables near the front window when she overheard Karen talking to another deputy outside the hardware store across the street. Jenny had excellent hearing, and she caught every word of their conversation. Karen was bragging, Jenny told me, her voice shaking with anger. She said, and I quote, "That little diner woman learned her lesson about crossing me. It only took one fake Facebook post to destroy 15 years of work. Maybe now other business owners will think twice before they disrespect law enforcement." The revelation hit me like lightning. Karen had admitted to creating the fake social media post. She had deliberately orchestrated the buffet disaster. And according to Jenny, she had also bragged about teaching lessons to other business owners who had not shown her proper respect. This was not personal vendetta against me specifically. This was a pattern of abuse that Karen had been using to control and terrorize local businesses. I spent the next 3 days making phone calls to other restaurant owners in the county. What I discovered made my blood boil. Karen had targeted at least 6 other establishments over the past 2 years. The pizza place that had asked her to pay for her order like everyone else suddenly faced multiple health inspections. The bakery that had refused to give her free wedding cakes for her daughter received anonymous complaints about rodent infestations. The family restaurant that had asked her to keep her voice down during a loud phone call mysteriously failed a surprise fire safety inspection. Every business owner I spoke to had the same story. They had somehow offended Karen, and then they faced a campaign of harassment disguised as law enforcement. Most had been too afraid to speak out because fighting the sheriff seemed impossible. They had suffered in silence, just as I had been doing. But now I had evidence. I had witnesses. And most importantly, I had reached the point where I had nothing left to lose. If Karen wanted to destroy my life, she was going to get a fight she never expected. Revenge, I learned, requires patience and planning. For 2 weeks, I researched everything I could about Karen's habits, weaknesses, and preferences. I watched her like she had been watching me, studying her patterns and waiting for the perfect opportunity. What I discovered was that Karen had one major weakness that I could exploit: her enormous pride. Karen bragged constantly about her ability to handle spicy food. She made it part of her tough sheriff persona, claiming she could eat anything and never break a sweat. I had heard her boast to other customers about winning hot wing contests and laughing at people who could not handle jalapenos. She wore her spice tolerance like a badge of honor, just another way to prove she was tougher than everyone around her. That gave me an idea that was both simple and brilliant. Ghost peppers are among the hottest peppers in the world, measuring over 1 million Scoville heat units. For comparison, a jalapeno measures about 5,000. Ghost peppers are so hot they can cause temporary blindness, severe throat swelling, and intense pain that lasts for hours. They are not something you play with casually. I spent 3 days perfecting my ghost pepper wing recipe. I had to special order the peppers online because no local store carried anything that extreme. I practiced making the sauce, testing different concentrations until I found the perfect balance. It had to be hot enough to incapacitate Corinne, but not so hot that it would cause permanent damage. I wanted humiliation, not hospitalization. The wings looked completely normal. I coated them in a traditional buffalo sauce that masked the ghost pepper taste for the first few seconds. Someone taking a big bite would not realize what they had eaten until the heat started building, and by then, it would be too late. The ghost peppers would hit their system like a delayed explosion, causing maximum shock and discomfort. Next, I set up hidden cameras throughout the restaurant. I bought small wireless cameras online and placed them strategically to capture every angle of the dining room. One behind the coffee machine pointing at Corinne's favorite corner booth. One on the shelf by the window overlooking the entire restaurant. One disguised as a decorative clock on the wall near the register. I tested them multiple times to make sure they recorded clear video with good audio. The cameras were my insurance policy. If I was going to humiliate Corinne, I needed proof of what she had done to deserve it. More importantly, I needed evidence of her reaction to show the world what happened when someone finally stood up to the county's biggest bully. The footage would be my protection against any retaliation she might attempt. Then came the most delicate part, setting the trap. I could not directly invite Corinne without raising suspicion. Instead, I created a fake law enforcement appreciation day at my restaurant. I printed flyers announcing a special thank you event for local police and sheriff's deputies, featuring free appetizers and discounted meals. I made sure the flyers mentioned our famous spicy wings as one of the featured items. I distributed the flyers at the police station, the courthouse, and other places where officers gathered. Within hours, word had spread through the law enforcement community. Several deputies called to ask about the event, and I could barely contain my excitement when Corinne herself called to confirm she would be attending. "This is very thoughtful of you, Sarah," she said in that fake sweet voice I had come to hate. "I am glad to see you are finally showing proper appreciation for law enforcement. I will definitely be there, and I expect your best service." The arrogance in her voice made my skin crawl, but it also confirmed that my plan was working perfectly. I spent the night before the event preparing everything down to the smallest detail. The ghost pepper wings were made fresh and kept warm under heat lamps. The cameras were charged and recording. I practiced my innocent expressions in the mirror, making sure I could serve Corinne with a straight face while knowing exactly what was about to happen. As I locked up the restaurant that night, I felt something I had not experienced in months: hope. For too long, I had been Corinne's victim, suffering her abuse in silence while she destroyed everything I had worked for. Tomorrow, the roles would be reversed. Tomorrow, Corinne would learn what it felt like to be humiliated in public by someone she had underestimated. Tomorrow, justice would be served with a side of ghost peppers. The morning of my revenge arrived with perfect weather. Sunshine streamed through the diner windows, and the air was crisp with the promise of spring. I arrived at 5 in the morning to make final preparations, checking the cameras one last time and ensuring the ghost pepper wings were ready for their starring role. My hands were steady as I set up the dining room, but my heart was pounding with anticipation. Corinne arrived at exactly 10:30, just as I knew she would. She never liked to be first to any event, preferring to make an entrance when others were already present. 3 other deputies had already arrived and were enjoying normal buffalo wings and coffee at the counter. They greeted Corinne with the same nervous respect I had observed before, straightening up when she walked in and speaking more carefully in her presence. She wore her full uniform, pressed to perfection, with every piece of equipment polished and positioned exactly right. Her badge caught the morning light as she surveyed the restaurant like a queen examining her domain. The other customers instinctively lowered their voices when she entered, that same shrinking behavior I had witnessed dozens of times before. "Good morning, Sheriff Karen," I said with my brightest smile, walking over to greet her personally. "Thank you so much for coming to our Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. I have a special table set up for you right here." I gestured to her usual corner booth, which gave her the perfect view of the entire restaurant and positioned her directly in front of my best hidden camera. Karen settled into the booth with obvious satisfaction. "This is more like it, Sarah. I am glad to see you are finally showing proper respect for the people who keep this community safe." Her voice carried across the restaurant, ensuring everyone could hear her words. She wanted the other customers to witness what she believed was my public submission to her authority. "I want to personally thank you for everything you do," I continued, laying it on thick. "That is why I prepared something special just for you. Our finest spicy wings, made with my own secret recipe. I know how much you enjoy challenging your taste buds." I placed the plate of ghost pepper wings in front of her with ceremonial precision. The wings looked absolutely perfect. Golden brown and glistening with sauce, they appeared identical to the regular buffalo wings the other deputies were eating. Karen examined them with approval, clearly pleased by the special attention. She picked up the largest wing and held it up like a trophy. "Now this is what I call proper service," she announced to the room. "Some business owners understand how to treat law enforcement with respect." She took a massive bite, tearing off nearly half the wing with her teeth. The other customers watched with interest, probably wondering why the sheriff was making such a show of eating chicken wings. For the first few seconds, nothing happened. Karen chewed confidently, even nodding with satisfaction at the taste. The ghost pepper sauce was designed to fool people exactly like this, masking its true power behind familiar buffalo flavors. She swallowed the bite and immediately reached for another wing. "Excellent flavor, Sarah. You have outdone yourself." She took another enormous bite, then another. I watched from behind the counter, counting down the seconds until the ghost peppers would begin their work. 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. Then I saw the first sign. Karen's eyes began to water slightly, just enough for her to blink more frequently than normal. She reached for her water glass and took a small sip, probably thinking she was just a little thirsty. She continued eating, determined to finish the wings in front of her audience. 30 seconds after the first bite, the real heat began to build. Karen's face started to flush, and she cleared her throat once, then twice. She reached for her water again, this time taking a longer drink. The other deputies glanced over with mild interest, but they had no idea what was about to unfold. 45 seconds in, Karen began to sweat. Tiny beads of perspiration appeared on her forehead, and she wiped them away with her napkin while trying to maintain her composure. She had eaten 2 full wings by this point, consuming enough ghost pepper concentrate to fell a much larger person. At the 1-minute mark, the ghost peppers reached their full intensity. Karen's eyes went wide with shock and pain. Her face turned bright red, then deeper red, then almost purple. She grabbed her water glass and drained it completely, but water only spread the capsaicin around her mouth, making everything worse. "Hot," she gasped, the first crack in her authoritative facade. The other customers turned to look at her with growing curiosity. The deputies at the counter stopped eating their own wings and stared at their boss with confusion. That was when Karen realized she was in serious trouble. and her desperate attempts to maintain control, while clearly suffering, became the most satisfying thing I had ever witnessed. What happened next exceeded my wildest expectations. Corinne tried to stand up from the booth, probably intending to escape to the bathroom, but her legs were shaking too badly to support her weight. She collapsed back into the seat, her hands clawing at her throat as the ghost pepper heat continued building in intensity. "Water," she gasped, but her voice came out as a strangled whisper. I pretended not to hear her, busying myself with wiping down the counter while secretly watching every moment of her breakdown. The other customers had stopped eating and were staring at Corinne with fascination and growing alarm. Sweat poured down Corinne's face like she had been running a marathon in summer heat. Her carefully styled hair became matted and disheveled. Her pristine uniform darkened with perspiration stains. She yanked at her collar, trying to get air, but the ghost peppers were affecting her breathing as well as her mouth and throat. "Help me," she wheezed to the deputies at the counter. They looked uncertain, torn between their instinct to assist their boss and their confusion about what was actually happening. One of them started to get up, but Corinne waved him away with a gesture that was meant to look authoritative but came across as desperate flailing. That was when I decided to twist the knife a little deeper. I walked over to Corinne's table with a pitcher of ice water and a concerned expression. "Oh my goodness, Sheriff, are you feeling all right? You look a little flushed. Was there something wrong with the wings?" Corinne tried to speak but could only produce strangled, gasping sounds. Her eyes were streaming tears, and saliva dripped from her mouth as her body tried to cope with the assault on her nervous system. She grabbed the water pitcher from my hands and began pouring it directly into her mouth, not caring that half of it spilled down her uniform. "Maybe you should call for medical assistance," suggested Mrs. Patterson from the next table over. She was one of the customers who had witnessed Corinne's harassment campaign against my restaurant, and I could see the irony was not lost on her. "No," Corinne managed to croak out, her voice barely recognizable. "I am fine. Everything is fine." But everything was clearly not fine. She was shaking uncontrollably, gasping for air and making sounds that were somewhere between whimpering and growling. The other customers began murmuring among themselves, sharing observations and theories about what they were witnessing. Some pulled out their phones to record video, though they had no idea I was already capturing everything in high definition from multiple angles. "You know," I said casually, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I should mention that all of our appreciation events are recorded for security purposes. We have cameras throughout the restaurant to ensure everyone's safety." I gestured toward the hidden cameras, letting Corinne know that her humiliation was being preserved for posterity. The knowledge that she was being filmed seemed to break something inside Corinne. She tried one last time to assert her authority, struggling to her feet and attempting to straighten her disheveled uniform. "You cannot record me without permission," she wheezed. "This is illegal surveillance of a law enforcement officer." But her threats carried no weight when she could barely speak and was obviously in severe distress. The other customers looked at her with pity rather than fear. One of the deputies actually laughed, though he tried to cover it with a cough. Corinne's absolute authority had evaporated along with her dignity. "Actually," said Mr. Johnson from the corner table, "recording in a public establishment is completely legal, especially when someone is making false accusations." He was the owner of the pizza place that Corinne had targeted with health inspections, and he was clearly enjoying watching his tormentor suffer. Other customers began sharing their own stories. Mrs. Chen mentioned the anonymous complaints against her bakery. The teenage dishwasher talked about how Corinne had harassed his family. One by one, Corinne's victims found their voices, emboldened by seeing her reduced to a sweating, gasping mess who could not retaliate. Karen tried to leave, stumbling toward the door while clutching her throat. But the ghost peppers were nowhere near finished with her. She made it 3 steps before doubling over in pain, her body rejecting everything she had consumed. The sound she made was somewhere between a sob and a scream. Maybe some milk would help, I suggested helpfully, though we both knew it was far too late for simple remedies. The ghost peppers would torture her for hours, a fitting punishment for someone who had tortured so many others with her abuse of power. Karen's deputies had to carry her out of my restaurant. She was still conscious but completely incapacitated, unable to walk or speak coherently. They loaded her into the patrol car like she was under arrest, which struck me as beautifully ironic. The last image I had of Sheriff Karen was her red, swollen face pressed against the car window as they drove toward the hospital. Her career as a small-town tyrant effectively ended by a plate of chicken wings. I uploaded the camera footage to social media that same evening. The video of Karen's complete breakdown went viral within hours, shared thousands of times across multiple platforms. People added their own stories in the comments, creating a digital testimony to her years of abuse and corruption. The hashtag #GhostPepperJustice began trending, and Karen became a cautionary tale about what happens when bullies with badges finally meet their match. The formal complaints began flooding the sheriff's department the next morning. Business owners who had suffered in silence for years suddenly found the courage to document their experiences with Karen's harassment campaigns. The county commissioners received dozens of calls demanding an investigation. Local news stations picked up the story, interviewing Karen's victims and examining the pattern of abuse that had been hidden for so long. Karen tried to claim she had been poisoned deliberately, but the evidence worked against her. The Law Enforcement Appreciation Day had been publicly advertised. She had voluntarily attended and chosen to eat the wings. The footage showed me serving her with normal hospitality while she bragged about her spice tolerance. There was no law against serving spicy food to someone who requested it, even if that food turned out to be spicier than expected. More importantly, the investigation into Karen's conduct revealed the true scope of her corruption. The fake social media post that had destroyed my restaurant was traced back to an account she had created. Phone records showed calls between Karen and the people who had filed anonymous complaints against local businesses. Bank records revealed that several of her victims had made suspicious payments to accounts connected to Karen's family members. Karen was suspended pending investigation, then quietly forced into early retirement to avoid a public trial. The sheriff's department underwent a complete reorganization, with new leadership committed to rebuilding trust with the community. Several of her former deputies came forward with their own stories of Karen's abuse, painting a picture of a department ruled by fear and intimidation. My restaurant experienced a renaissance that exceeded even my original success. People drove from neighboring counties to try the famous ghost pepper wings and hear the story firsthand. I had to hire additional staff to handle the crowds. Local news crews filmed segments in my dining room. Food bloggers wrote articles about the revenge wings that brought down a corrupt sheriff. But the most satisfying part was not the fame or the increased business. It was watching my community heal from years of Karen's toxic influence. Business owners who had been living in fear began operating openly again. Citizens who had been afraid to speak out against injustice found their voices. The culture of intimidation that Karen had created slowly gave way to something healthier and more honest. 6 months later, I received a letter from Karen. She had moved to another state and was working as a security guard at a shopping mall. The letter was an apology of sorts, though it was more about her own rehabilitation than genuine remorse for her victims. She claimed to have learned her lesson about abusing power and asked for my forgiveness. I never replied to that letter. Some people deserve forgiveness, but they have to earn it through actions, not words. Corinne had spent years destroying lives and businesses for her own entertainment. One letter could not undo that damage or restore the trust she had shattered. Instead, I framed the first dollar I earned after Corinne's downfall and hung it behind the register. Underneath, I placed a small sign that reads, "Sometimes the best revenge is served spicy." It serves as a reminder that even the most powerless person can find justice if they are patient, creative, and willing to fight back when it matters most.